Hey everybody, welcome to our session today. It's been an honor to have a week with you where we're talking about our theme, which is, developing cybersecurity professionals of character. And we start off by saying nothing great is done except through character. So we started the week with Katie Arrington talking about this major initiative she's leading through the Department of Defense, changing the culture around how cybersecurity is woven into the very acquisition strategy. We then had two leaders from MePush talk about the technical skills and the discipline to be leading two of the largest incident responses in America going on today. They just started a third earlier this week. Tuesday, we had leaders from the FBI, North Carolina Department of Safety, Public Safety, and the state's chief risk officer. And they talked about this whole of state approach and the partnership those three organizations have to improve the security of the people here in North Carolina. They did share some disturbing statistics, but also some pragmatic advice about how to stay cyber safe. That afternoon, we had Colonel Ustra from the Special Operations Command lead a workshop designed to help leaders define strategic and tactical goals and then build alignment and commitment to those goals. Then we closed Wednesday, as you remember, with a different presentation from the musician Charles Denler and how he shared how he stays curious at the top of his game after decades in the music industry. Similar to Monday's presentation from Connor and Pete from MePush, yesterday we took a different tack. Casey Marquette talked about his role at Cognizant and how they went through what I'll call the perfect storm of dealing with a major ransomware incident. Right, they were in the middle of a pandemic and a cyber incident, and of course, staff having to go home all over the world. Talk about grit. Then we closed yesterday with two presentations from distinguished leaders, one from Google and the other from OceanX. They had specifically architected initiatives to lead major organizations through the technically demanding and programmatically difficult shift to cloud-based development, hosting, and security. Today, we're pleased to have insights from Ally Bank and their cybersecurity leaders and how they leveraged their prodigious critical thinking skills to foresee the need for a fraud fusion capability, the technical skills to build it, and the collaboration required to detect and respond to that complex threat vectors in real time. And it's my pleasure now to introduce Keith Gordon, who was the CISO at Ally Bank when this was going on. So I'll turn it over to Keith. Keith, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate the opportunity to be here, and glad to actually be here with Hayes and Daniel, some of my old teammates from Ally. As Adam mentioned, I have since moved to be the Chief Security Officer at CIBC, which is Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, so based up in Toronto, but thankfully still here in North Carolina. But I don't know about where you are today, but I'm looking out my window and it's a little crazy out there at the moment with the weather. So hopefully my screen and my power stays on so we can get through this without any interruptions. But thanks for the opportunity again, Adam. I know we've got some materials that we were going to walk through. Adam, I'm not sure who was going to bring those up. There we go. Thank you, Daniel. So as we kick this off, we're going to break this up into three different sections. Really, I'm going to talk through kind of the foundations of kind of what is fusion, and really kind of what are the foundational components of a fusion program. Hayes is going to walk through next after that and give some advice on how to stand that up and really get the political backing of leadership to help drive it out, and then obviously some financials that are going to be needed to do that. And then Daniel's going to come in and talk about the nuts and bolts of it, down to all of the components that we're going to talk through, but he's going to go into a fair amount of granularity as we do that. But as you think back to fusion as a topic, it's a fairly recent topic as you think about it from the first time. If you want to go to the next slide, Daniel. Well, let me start here first. It goes back to financial crimes in general. We've been seeing different types of integrated attacks for many, many years. Even going back to the Bangladesh bank attack that we saw quite a few years ago. But the funny thing is we still talk about that from a financial services perspective. And, fusion is one of those probably fairly unique topics that financial services has really taken a hold of. Because if you look here at the different types of attacks that we've been seeing, everything from pretty significant dollar loss for fraud to insiders with private information about clients. You go to the Heartland attack around credit card information, and and you kind of can move through that list. It's data, it's information, it's money. So what you can see is there's no single threaded attack anymore. We used to see just, all right, we're going to see a DDoS attack and that's it. Or we're going to see an account takeover by an individual and that's it. And now what we've seen is the attacks, and these are just some examples of the attacks that we've seen have been so integrated across the spectrum of the controls that we have in place that you can no longer just think vertically as it relates to just cyber, just fraud, just AML, or just physical security, because we see them as integrated components, as these are just some great examples to do that. Next slide, Daniel. So, and also as you think about timing, obviously everybody hears about the attacks that that you see on the news, but what we will also say is that what you hear about in the news is only scratching the surface of what we actually deal with on a daily basis. And when I mean daily, it is daily. And it's just very interesting how just earlier today I was down getting a cup of coffee. We're all working from home, so you can go to your kitchen and get a cup of coffee, and I get a text on my phone saying, "Oh, well, we're getting a DDoS attack. I should go back up to my office," right? But it's the nature of the business that we've got effective controls, but cyber crime has been around for years. I mean, decades, literally since the word cyber came about back, in the mid to late 2000s. Crime was already there. Back in the day, it was, we called it carding. So it was just about credit cards. And then it's evolved throughout the life cycle as e-commerce has taken over. And now the fact that, data is sitting in clouds, data is, shared amongst companies, data becomes a critical component to the cybercrime ecosystem because data is worth money. So it's not just a single chain, right? It's multiple cogs in the chain that have to come together to, in many cases, infiltrate a final attack. But these are just some examples of attacks that and attack scenarios that we've seen just at CIBC, right? So what I will also say is it doesn't matter where you are in the world. You can be in Canada, you can be in the United States, you can be in Europe. We're still all seeing a pretty significant increase in attack. So next slide, Daniel. So Fusion Center, this is where I was getting ready to go to a bit ago, but this was really the Fusion Center concept was created after 9/11. When we saw a disparity between how different agencies were responding to a pretty significant attack. Well, we've now taken that same theory and bringing it into financial services and linking multiple different components to thinking about how can you go as a collective team to combat an incident or an attack. If you look at the Department of Justice example here, it's how do you bring together things like private sector, public sector, all of the intelligence agencies, as well as the folks that are actually on the ground that may have to respond. So it's how do you bring that together from communications, from data sharing to real-time response. So that was really the driver behind the Fusion Center concept. And obviously it's been one that the federal government has continued to leverage in multiple facets now. So it's not just in cyber, it's many different areas of Fusion. Next slide, Daniel. All right, so let's talk about the Fusion Center and really what that means. And when you think about it from a security standpoint, the four blocks, the pillars of what we would consider a Fusion Center are information security, think cybersecurity, fraud, corporate security, or think about physical security, and AML. AML meaning anti-money laundering. So let me give an example, and that may help paint the picture of why each one of those may have to be a part of a Fusion Center. So if you think about an attack that initially may start out, what you look at it as just a pure cyber attack, where you're throwing a bunch of traffic at a website, and maybe that is an online banking website, and you look at that just singularly. But then you start to bring in your peers, like the fraud team, to say, okay, we've seen malicious attack coming through our online banking authentication portal. Let's have the fraud guys go in and see, was there any level of success? All right. So if you have some success in the attack, then you have to bring in a partner like anti-money laundering, because from a regulatory perspective, banks are required to file what we call a suspicious activity report, or a SAR, if there is access gained to an account that has over $5,000 of value. Okay, so now you've just gone from what you thought was a DDoS attack to a more deliberate, what we call brute force attack, coming at an authentication portal that has now potentially impacted a or multiple customers that have value in those accounts equaling or above $5,000. So just by that quick scenario, if all of those, if the fraud, information security, and AML teams are not in lockstep, you're going to have some pretty significant disparity in maybe how you have to respond back to regulators. How do you respond back to senior leadership? But the Fusion Center really brings the best of all of that together, because by a process, if you put a process in place, then it becomes just a handoff of, okay, we've seen this. All right, we know we need to bring in this other team to help do some additional investigation, so that the cyber team can continue investigating their part. The fraud team can come in. Now you've got multiple teams, right? As you continue to add that on, the scope and which of the people that you can leverage to help drive out an investigation not only makes it more efficient, it reduces the time needed to actually get to the point of understanding what's actually happening. And at the same time, what can we do to mitigate the risk or mitigate the threat? Right? So it's all of that together is what we call a Fusion Center. And that was just an example where it included fraud, information security, and AML. But you could do the same thing from a corporate security standpoint. It could be an attack on ATMs, or what we call an ATM cash out, right? And that would be potentially all four of those groups. So, just the idea of Fusion is, and I look at it as two-pronged. One is it's a physical location, in many cases, sitting alongside the Security Operations Center or the Physical Security Operations Center, just as an ecosystem. But it's also Fusion as a topic or a theory and strategy. So it's, again, how do you operate that way? So next slide, Daniel. So as you think about the fundamental components of a Fusion Center, it's really based around four fundamental components. It's people, technology, data and analytics, and just overall design of the program. But really what's important are those gray boxes right in the middle of this. Is those are the functional components that all of the people, program, technology, and data have to interact with, right? So those are the capabilities, as we call them. And Daniel and Hayes are going to go into a little bit more detail on each one of these. So I'm going to hit them at the top level and let them go into the more granularity. But think about threat intelligence, just as one example. In most companies, if you're a financial services company, you've got a fraud team that's pulling in intelligence. And it may be from other banks, it may be from intelligence sources on kind of what kind of fraud activities are we seeing. The same thing from a cyber team. Okay, we maybe buy intelligence, or we're gathering open source intelligence about attacks that may be happening around the globe. And then AML is doing the same thing around, okay, what kind of gangs may be out there trying to perpetrate fraud, right? Well, um, in the history of banking, those have all been very siloed data elements, and really with very little integration. But the fusion model brings those together so that you can do better what we call link analysis. So where you can say, all right, well, we used to think that it was just a DDoS or an account takeover kind of brute force attack. But now what we're seeing is based upon intelligence is that's actually linked to a fraud attack that we've been seeing that's actually linked to a threat actor gang that may be based in wherever, Eastern Europe, that all three of those now we're seeing as connected attacks vectors to ultimately perpetrate fraud. So, if you think about just the theory of fusion, that's just a great example to show how the data, the people, the technology, bringing those together can significantly improve our ability to respond. And underlying all of it is data, the analytics capabilities on how do you determine what may be anomalous or not. Case management thinks about literally an incident happens. How do you have an integrated approach to responding to that incident? Reporting is absolutely key because that's how do you report back up to leadership? How do you report across those teams? So again, we're all thinking about things consistently and in real time. Governance and risk management is one of those elements that you may not think about, but we have to make sure that we've got an integrated governance model around data usage, around people, so that we don't step across boundary lines, right? And I mean, each one of those functions, going back to AML, physical security, cyber, and fraud, they have a deep level of expertise, and we want to make sure that we've got a good governance model between those four. And then lastly, it's not just about an internal collaboration. It's how do we extend it to the ecosystem in which we operate. So as an example, intelligence can extend way beyond just your firm to include other banks, or if you're a healthcare, whatever you are, other companies that may be doing something similar to you, so that we can collaboratively share, so that the term around kind of all boats rise with the tide, that's absolutely the case here. How do we include the ecosystem of peers in the industry? Okay, next slide. And again, these are a little bit more detail, and Daniel's going to go into a lot of these examples. But just to give some highlights of some of the things that we would put into like analytics and data around fusion insights. So how do you aggregate data together to create use cases, again, that are common, so that you can then leverage your analytic capability to begin to look for those proactively, right? Every attack that we see, every new type of um, scenario is going to drive a use case that then we want to automate and put right back into the process. So again, that we're not constantly fighting the same battles, we're learning and growing. And performance and reporting is absolutely key too, because we constantly are looking to automate more, because we're in a people-centric world. How can we automate and leverage the people for those real high-value capabilities, and automate where we can? And then strategy around fusion is bigger than just kind of a response mechanism too. It can be a driver of the overarching strategy of the team, because we're constantly seeing the threats and risks that are coming at us on a daily basis, and we're able to in real time see where we may have control gaps. So that's going to help us continue to drive out where we need to move in the future. Next slide. Um, and again, I talked about intelligence a minute ago, but really this is fusion around intelligence allows us to get to a level of depth that we've never been able to see before. The term that we kind of use in here is called tradecraft, and that is how do you get to a level of subject matter expertise in a broad set of types of attacks that may be horizontal type of attacks versus where we always were staying in that vertical. And then also thinking about third parties or vendor engagement. Again, how do we extend the four walls of the company so it's not just our own little bubble, that we're extending that intelligence framework? Case management is an interesting one in investigations because, again, for as long as I've been around, each one of those four groups that we've talked about had their own way of investigating, tracking, and documenting a case or an incident. And when you get to that common platform and common way in integrating an incident, the data just begins to pop out and it becomes very clear where you've got those integration points. So just the foundation of just dealing with an incident from a single system is pretty critical. Next slide, please. And I am about ready to hand it over to Hayes. So as you think about the operations of fusion as a topic, the idea that it becomes an operational function is critical in the mindset of leadership too, because this is going to take some money to go build this. But as we think about it as a collective and interdependent operations model, that's going to give us benefits far beyond what we could do separately, it becomes pretty readily apparent as you're quote unquote selling your story on why you need to go do it, because of the efficiency gains that you're going to get, but also at the end of this, as a bank, our job is really to do a couple things. Obviously, we want to reduce the amount of fraud loss that we have, because that's literally dollars that we lose. But I think even more importantly is having our customers and clients feeling secure that no matter what type of threat that we as a bank or they as a customer are facing, that we've got an integrated approach in how we're identifying it, triaging it in this case, how do we contain that threat or that attack, and then recovery efforts to ensure that we are taking care of our customers and clients first, making them whole, but then from a bank perspective, recovering from maybe an open gap or threat. And then obviously with most incidents, you've got the post-incident work that, again, historically, we're very vertically centric. And now as you bring it together into that common fusion framework, it really helps us to be able to pinpoint the exact gaps that may have contributed to the failure. So, and this is also driving a broader topic around maybe cross-channel engagement as a business. So you think about a traditional business that may have multi-channels in which they interact with customers and clients. How do you ensure that you've got a consistent way in which you are authenticating them if they're calling on a phone, going in person, doing it online, doing it on a mobile phone, right? Again, this is a bigger than just an operations model concept as well, is how do you fuse an interaction capability with customers and clients? So, with that, I think what I wanted to do here was really just introduce the topic and really why it's important for us to think about it this way. And also, I do want to say that even though that, everything I largely talked about has been banking centric, this can translate to really any other vertical that you may be in. It's, again, an integrated response to something that goes bump in the night. Okay. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Hayes and let him drive through the next part of actually implementing it. So Hayes, hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Keith, and appreciate you folks having me out to speak at Retreat today. It's good to see a few familiar names on the participants list. Good to see you folks again, at least virtually. And as Keith mentioned, the take I'm going to give you here today is about taking a concept, a cybersecurity idea, and shifting it from a place where it's just an idea with no money to a place where it actually is getting done, right? So, there's a number of you, I believe, on this call who are kind of at the beginnings of your career. And you may be very excited to go out there and catch some bad guys. And we look forward to you fulfilling that capability. But what I think you will find as your career progresses more and more is that you will come into situations where the things that you need to catch the bad guys aren't always there for you. They have to actually go be built. They have to be paid for. Go figure. Somebody's not just handing you cash on a regular basis to go do these things, and you have to kind of convince people. I've been a cybersecurity practitioner across a couple of different organizations for the better part of 17 years almost now. And in almost every role that I've been involved with, I've had to at some point take a approach similar to the one I'm presenting to you over the next few slides to try to get something built, right? So this is kind of a vision about how to get something built. And the steps that I've laid out in front of you on this agenda are, I'll go through them kind of in a sequential fashion, but in reality, they tend to go all at the same time. It's a one big rush depending on the funding cycles and strategy cycles of your particular organizations. And again, as Keith mentioned, we're coming very much at this from the perspective of a financial institution. So your mileage may vary depending on your particular industry vertical and the organization that you have set up and where your cybersecurity organization sits in here. But we are, this is also specifically aimed around some of the things that we learned around putting together a cyber fraud fusion concept and getting it going. So if you wouldn't mind flipping into the next screen there, Daniel. The first thing that you really want to do as you've come up with a concept, and again, I'm going to kind of talk at this from a senior cybersecurity leader perspective, but it can be at any level in the organization. It's wherever your organization is allowing good ideas to come from, and hopefully as you are practitioners in the field, you feel empowered to have them come from you. But at some point, you need to get your ideas down on paper to be able to lay out for somebody what you're trying to do and how it makes sense. This is a very early on example of how we started to lay things out, right? There's some key components here. You might recognize the themes from one of the slides earlier in Keith's presentation and some of the key components: threat intelligence, analytics, aggregated monitoring, case management, so forth. These things actually fit together as the top three kind of as key supporting things, and then you have a number of concepts underneath them that hold the whole thing up. And so you have any number of ways you can show this, but the important thing is to start laying out your ideas. In some of those blank boxes over to the right, you would typically lay out some very specific ideas, tasks, and goals that you want to lay out there. Without having those goals and hopefully some sort of measurement by which they can be ascertained whether you've met them, you'll have a hard time convincing somebody that you've got an idea that is well enough thought through that it can be executed on. So first thing you want to do, get your ideas down on paper, get a structure to it, put some meat on the bones as to what you're actually going to do. Go ahead and flip to the next slide. All right. As you go through a big program concept like this, especially in an area that perhaps is a little bit new or different, as cyber fraud fusion tends to be, it's relatively, the concepts are relatively obvious, but the execution and people doing this is not as well widespread. You may want to get some external perspective. What does that do for you? Well, it helps people that you're going to try to be pitching this to understand that, number one, you've done your research. Number two, it's not just your ideas. Other people have this, agree with this, that are experts in their own field. And three, that you've been able to incorporate ideas outside of your own head, right? The good thing about this is if you are working, you can work your personal network for this kind of help. Now, you certainly want to make sure you have non-disclosure agreements in place, but the good thing is that you may be able to ask a few organizations to do you a favor, have an hour-long conversation with you about your concepts, about your ideas, all under the protection of the NDA, and they will likely be happy to consult with you. Now, why are they doing that for free? Because they realize that you may be asking them to help you carry some of this out in the future, and so that's the carrot, right? So don't forget that as you go on, right? That you had these people help you out in putting together this external perspective, and you may want to make sure that you're asking them to come back in and help some do some work. A couple of examples that we put down here that are specific to cyber fraud fusion concepts, right? We first of all consulted a fraud-specific red team provider, right? This is a company that is actually out there all the time, actually trying to do offensive operations in the specific field of fraud. I don't think there's a ton of those. So did I go on mute? No, you can hear me now. Okay. There's a number of those. There's not very many of those providers out there. So that's, if you find one, grab a hold of them. Same thing on the cyber side, right? So you consulted the fraud red team, get the cyber red team provider. There's plenty of those out there. Some are very good, obviously, and you want to latch on to those guys. If you have access to a big consulting firm with a cyber shop, they are great generalists, right? They have big program level views. They see all across the industry as to what is happening. So they can pull a bunch of experts together, and they can make sense of cross-functional concepts like cyber fraud fusion. And if there's a specific item in your plan that has a certain specialty, for example, suppose you felt like there was a need to really bring in an identity and access management component to your cyber fraud fusion for whatever reason. Maybe your customer authentication program needs a little bit of shoring up. Maybe you bring in an IAM specialty provider to help consult. So that's one of the things that really helped us early on, is getting some of that external perspective on our program. Go ahead and flip the slide there. Okay, you need to find some allies, and this goes even, some of you may be surprised to learn, if you're the CISO. The CISO often has a huge amount of influence, sway across the organization, access to senior leaders, in a lot of cases, especially in financial institutions, access to the board of directors themselves. But that doesn't mean that the CISO can always go it alone, right? So finding somebody who can be an evangelist, a key ally for you in this journey, who believes in what you're pitching and it has a similar reach and network of influence themselves within your organization is key. We were able to find that. They were actually able to contribute ideas to the overall concept, and they were able to reach to levels that the CISO was able to, but also was another voice in other areas that wasn't as commonly accessible to the information security organization. So finding that passionate ally that can help you is really helpful. So that's something that hopefully your CISO can latch onto. But if you're kind of working for a CISO to help put this together, as I was, that's something that you may be able to do some research on their behalf as well. Next thing, besides the key ally, look at your focus. Focus on your executive stakeholders. These are people that have influence and interest in your organization, specifically along the cybersecurity and/or fraud space. These are people that can either choose to get behind your idea or choose to block it, right? And you need to identify those people. You need to have conversations with them at some point about your ideas. And hopefully, if you don't get their buy-in and their enthusiasm about it, you at least get their assurance that they're not going to block it, right? So if they are going to try to block it, you need to kind of work with them to see what their concerns are so that you can move forward. I've named off a few of the key roles that you may consider in an organization that's like mine or the ones I've operated in. Obviously, again, your mileage may vary, but the CFO obviously typically controls the purse strings. Very, very important. The CIO is going to be, and the CTO are going to be working technology, implementing technology, for example. Compliance and risk, similar thing where you're talking about doing things that will reduce or influence risk posture for your organization. You probably need to bring those folks in so that they have a good feeling about what you're after. And then the third thing is, now that you've kind of focused on your executive stakeholders for a little while, focus on your stakeholders who are actually going to execute the activity, right? So how do you get this done, right? It's typically not the CIO is going to go do this work. It's people across the tech teams, it's across the rest of the fraud and cybersecurity teams on the ground, the practitioners that need to get this done. And so you'll need to have some discussions with the middle leadership and maybe the people on the ground to put forth your vision, make sure that they're understanding this. Go ahead and flip to the next slide there, Daniel. Thanks. So now you've gathered your stakeholders. Now you need to start marketing the program. What we've put down here on the bottom is just a really basic example of a table to just even, once again, refine the initial concepts, get people understanding the concepts that you're bringing forth and programs that you want to run. And a couple things you're trying to do here. Again, you're trying to give confidence to these stakeholders that you have a bit of a business plan and you know what you're doing in putting together this thing. You're putting together an appropriate amount of work. You're going to fund it in a group of buckets that can be tracked and executed against meaningfully and carefully. And you're doing it in a way that makes them feel that you really have a good plan here, right? If they get the sense that you don't have a good plan, they're going to have some concerns, right? You're asking to probably spend a good amount of money here in some way, shape, or form, whatever that means for your organization. And if they don't have a good sense that you know what you're doing, what you're going to do with that money, you're going to have some problems. So just even putting together basic presentations that look professional is really key. And this is just an example slide, completely notional, but I would encourage you that if you're not a PowerPoint guru, find the person in your organization that's really sharp at PowerPoint to help you along with some of these marketing things. I'd say, paint that picture. You really want to give them those ideas I just talked about, but also try to keep it simple. The more complex you make this, the more expectations you will have on you to execute on it. And then, of course, after you put all this together, those stakeholders that you started to identify and have chats with initially on the, as we just talked, you need to go show this all to them. This is basically your pitch. Okay, go ahead and flip to the next slide there, Daniel. Thank you. And of course, at some point, you have to get down to the brass tacks of how much this is going to cost, right? And you're going to have to essentially talk to some of the financial people about getting that money, and your stakeholders are going to have to get behind you and say that this money should be spent, right? That kind of wellspring of voices in the leadership of your organization that says, this is a good idea, we should do this, it's going to cost this much and we agree with this. So you'll have to get in and start doing some financial estimates. This is very hard. This is a very hard part of your process because financial estimates going through to put together a project is can be a very detailed exercise. For any of you who've done project estimates before, you know what I'm talking about. And you're probably not having the time or the resources to go through and do this at a very detailed level. So you probably have to do some back of the napkin type estimates. Something that gives you about 70% confidence in the answer. You have to get some subject matter experts together. You may have to get somebody who's good at putting business cases together and really knows the financial processes in your organization, how they account for capitalization versus expense, that kind of thing. Project costs versus operations costs. These types of things completely going to be different depending on the organization you work for. So this is a very important process. A lot of things can go on here, but I'll just, we put some dummy numbers into this thing. But again, what this is showing you here, you've got a bucket of work. Buckets 1, 2, 3. You can add as many buckets as you want. We said probably you want to keep it simple because the more you put in, the more you have to deliver on, and the more expensive it gets as well. So keep it simple, but you're going to identify a number of projects in each of one of those buckets of work, the programs. You're going to estimate out how much expense it's going to take to carry out that project. You may need to simply add some headcount in some cases. You just want to hire people to help with this program. So you want to account for those distinctly. And then you want to do this over several years, right? Because you're probably not executing on everything all at once in 1 year. So keep that in mind. You'll want to bring that across several years. And this is where you want to be having some conversations about the people in your financial organization work for the CFO, about what they need to see and how, right? So at the end of the day, in this financial estimation process, you end up with a bunch of numbers that total up, and you can flip to the next slide, into a big old number, right? And again, completely made up numbers here, but you're going to spend, some odd millions of dollars over 4 years to do all these things. The size of your organization may completely skew these numbers to be lower or much larger if you're in a larger organization than the one I'm currently in, right? So, this is essentially the takeaway, right? So you're going to go, or your CISO is going to go, or your key ally and evangelist is going to go up to the CFO and maybe the CEO and maybe the board of directors and say, hey, over the next 4 years, we need to spend X millions of dollars really putting in place this cyber fraud fusion concept. We're going to spend this amount each year, right? That's the punchline. That's what you're preparing for. And at some point, a series of those people say, okay, we agree. We will find ways to, make this funding work. That gets into a much bigger and deeper story about how that actually mechanically happens. But that's the end game right there, is you get some money. Flip the slide. Okay, so you supposedly you've gotten your money now, and people are going to expect you to execute against all this. And to do that, you have to show some governance, right? You've been given a pot of money. You don't just get to walk away with that and nobody ever hears from you again. They want to be proven to them, your stakeholders, the leaders in your organization, that you've spent the money in the way you promised you would, to execute the things you promised you would. And I won't spend too much time here. Most organizations have some sort of project governance function that you can latch into here. You may have to create some bespoke functions that are specific to the needs of your organization given the context of the cyber fraud fusion program. But you're going to want to keep your project governance function informed. They're going to approve your projects directly. You're going to want to keep your risk management, enterprise risk management functions informed. And of course, the senior leaders of your organization, your C-suite, need to be kept informed because ultimately the big level promises were made to them. You can demonstrate your structure for this governance in a similar way. This is part of your marketing materials because you want to give people confidence that you're going to run this in a great way, in a very confident way. So again, you see your program names are down the bottom. You kind of have the day-to-day running of the programs and projects as the next level, and you kind of move up this project hierarchy along the way. A couple of pointers. As you receive the funding, you want to make some of your key early hires soon, right? What this allows you to do is get key experts in place that can start building the program on your behalf so you don't have to think of everything. You've got the vision. Now you're going to need people on the ground to help you carry it out. So you hire some of those people earlier. Specifically to that point, Daniel was already in our organization, but we made a key early transition for him to slide him into a cybercrime spot that allowed him to start building this program, which then allows you to start showing wins early. And that's important. If you can show early wins that show that you're getting execution off the ground soon, it will really go better for you. I think we've got one last slide. All right, just a few lessons learned, and then we're going to get you to the best part of the presentation, which is Daniel's practitioner level. We talked about the financial estimates. It's hard. You'll have to get very well acquainted with the financial processes at your organization. You'll need to have somebody in the CFO organization helping you, but you need to do it. You have to keep expectations realistic. Don't make this thing too big. You won't be able to execute on it. But at the same time, you want to paint a picture of confidence and that you can carry out what you can, and it's going to make a difference in the cyber fraud fusion area. And again, if you want to come back later and add additional scope, there's ways that you can wisely do that without appearing that you just forgot stuff. We talked a little bit about this. Once somebody says we agree at the very top what we should dedicate money to this, it doesn't always actually materialize in a check being handed to you the next day. You still have to navigate some financial functions. Just keep an eye out for that. And then, certainly the grassroots level, the people who are going to carry out this vision need to be brought in to help out at some point during this journey. You can't expect it to be all vision, all leadership, and push it way down and just expect it to happen. Get the grassroots folks, the practitioners, on board early. So thank you very much for letting me present that. Hopefully it was useful. Hopefully, as Daniel presents his portion, you'll be able to bring some of the context of this information into that discussion as well. But with that being said, Daniel, I'll let you take it away to kind of tell us about the things that you've been actually able to do since taking over a key portion of our cyber fraud fusion program.
All right, thank you very much, Hayes. So just real quick, I wanted to just give a quick background on myself. My name is Daniel McCauley. Been working in the financial sector for approximately the last 7 years. Been with Ally just shy of 2 years. Primary focus has been on threat intelligence. Come from I guess more of a traditional IT background, systems administrator, network engineering. This is a really exciting opportunity for me to talk about this. I have roots in Western North Carolina and Asheville, so I've loved seeing this retreat conference grow over the years, and I think it's wonderful to give back to the local community, but beyond Western North Carolina as well. And just high level agenda, going to be talking through threat intelligence. That's been my primary focus for the past 7 years. So I wanted to kind of talk through my approach in terms of implementing, cyber fraud fusion within Ally. I'm going to talk about high-level strategy, specifically how can we leverage threat intelligence with this new initiative. What we hope to get future state, and as well as some lessons learned. So we've heard about the vision and history from Keith. We've heard essentially how to create a blueprint and execute on that vision from Hayes. So again, I'd like to start off by talking a little bit about threat intelligence, and again, how that shaped my approach in terms of implementing cyber fusion within Ally. So what exactly is threat intelligence? So it is basically evidence-based knowledge related to an adversary's motives, targets, and attack behaviors. So they're tactics, techniques, and procedures which would allow an organization to make quicker and more informed decisions to defend against these threats and risks. So the idea is to go from reactive to more of a proactive approach by leveraging this evidence-based knowledge that exists either within the external landscape or the internal landscape within within your own organization. What are some characteristics of threat intelligence? They have to be relevant, timely, actionable. And one thing that, I truly enjoy, one of the things that I truly enjoy about threat intelligence is the fact that it's service oriented. It's, being a quote unquote man or woman for others, supplying, being a value add, not only to your own internal team, other departments across the organization, and of course the company as a whole. So, we've kind of got at least an introductory understanding of threat intelligence. My team in particular is going to be focusing on the external landscape. So we're going to be trying to identify and detect risks associated with cyber events that would pose a direct or indirect risk to Ally. What's important when we do identify these events, what is the actual current risk and what is the potential risk, in the next few days, weeks, months, et cetera. And I would say the most important, function for threat intelligence is providing awareness. And, whether that's awareness plus actions in terms of recommended mitigations to defend against these risks, or simply awareness in itself is an action. So moving along, let's talk about threat intelligence lifecycle. And, it's basically the process by which we are looking to transform data into information, and then the final product being intelligence. So that final product is going to be used for various teams for decision-making and further actions. Going through this life cycle, there's going to be new opportunities identified. We're going to identify new sources to pull data from, new processing and exploitation techniques, maybe optimize our analysis process as well. And then one thing to keep in mind is this life cycle is essentially going to align to what's called priority intelligence requirements. And that may change, per organization out there. But basically, again, it's going to, explicitly define what you're monitoring for. So risks that target Ally directly, risks that target the financial sector, risks that may target supply chain or third parties. So essentially indirect at that point. So let's talk about a little bit more, what is actually going through this life cycle. And that is basically the transformation of, again, data into information, and then the final product being intelligence. So, this first bullet point, it's important to know that this raw data needs to be subjected to processing and exploitation in order for it to transition into a more meaningful product of information. And then the journey is not done yet. So that information needs to then be subjected to an analysis phase, generally performed by a human analyst in order to turn that into intelligence. So, in order for an intelligence product to be effective, that additional context, that additional human analysis is key. And this last point here, some of the qualities involved with analysis include behavioral, technical, cultural knowledge that is used to help paint that complete picture, help add that additional context. And one thing I just wanted to mention, with that cultural knowledge, with that technical and behavioral analysis, or those qualities, folks need to be mindful of their biases, their geographic biases, cultural biases, et cetera. So it's important to, not have biased technical assessments when you're going through this life cycle and analysis. So Next slide. This is basically just a visual of, what I was just talking about previously. So that journey from raw data being processed, at that point being turned into information, and then let's have the human analysts perform some assessment, kind of put the puzzle pieces together. Let's determine current and potential risk, and then at that point we've got some actionable intelligence, and we can then disseminate that to our key stakeholders for them to take further action and decision. And just again, very important. Only finished intelligence products should be distributed to key stakeholders. It does. The recipients, there's not much of a value add if they're receiving just straight up raw technical indicators. That is, that might be in addition to an executive summary, an analyst comment, additional references, sources, again, to paint that complete picture. So moving on, just real quick, I wanted to talk about the 4 types of intelligence, threat intelligence. One being technical, that's going to be comprised of indicators of compromise, so IP addresses, hashes, URLs, domains, generally a very short lifespan in terms of time to live. The fidelity of these actual indicators tend to die off rather quickly. They are the easiest to generate. There's an abundance of technical intelligence available. The second item, tactical, it's going to include TTPs, which are tactics, techniques, and procedures associated with malicious actors or their campaigns. Generally have a longer lifespan, and it helps answer the question, how can we defend better? Third type, operational, essentially knowledge about incoming attacks or campaigns. Generally unique and often includes both technical and tactical. So for example, operational might be something that we might get word of a cyber event throughout the sector, from one of our peers, and they'll pass along some information. So we'll generally try to leverage as much of that to be proactive and defend against basically the same risk, but within our environment. And this last type, strategic, it's going to be more of a broad view of the cyber threat landscape. It may include non-cyber related events, geopolitical, et cetera. And it's basically, meant to present, this threat intelligence, this actionable intelligence to executives, senior leadership, et cetera. So as you can see here, strategic and tactical both are long-term usage, whereas operational and technical have short-term usage. So, that was a little introductory on threat intelligence. Along with threat intelligence, I'm also director of cyber crimes, and Hayes mentioned, this is essentially a new team. We're going to be focusing on, that intersection of cyber, fraud, AML. But I did want to just talk about, what are the types of activity that we're concerned with? What are we going to be looking for, essentially? So I wanted to define a couple things. The first being a cyber event, which is going to be an attempt to compromise or gain unauthorized access to systems, services, data, et cetera. The second item, cyber-enabled crime, that's going to consist of illegal activities facilitated by electronic systems and devices such as networks and computers. So this is important because, I think there's a key differentiator between, I guess, just more of a high-level cyber event, and then, what may lead into a cyber crime event at that point. Keith kind of talked to, a DDoS event, and maybe, there was some additional activity identified. So you have the cyber event being the DDoS and some, credential validation attacks or account takeover identified that would be the cyber-enabled crime at that point. So, with these events, with the cyber-enabled crime, you're gonna have cyber-related information. So this is going to be technical details, often referred to as indicators of compromise, that are going to paint a better picture of the infrastructure that was used, attack techniques, geographic location, et cetera. So, the key thing here is we're trying to paint an accurate picture of the digital footprint being leveraged in these events. So moving on, again, related to the cyber-related information, it is going to be critical that we are able to accurately parse out, track, analyze these technical details to not only better defend in the future, but if there's any reporting requirements that we need to submit to, regulatory bodies, et cetera. So here I've kind of outlined some specific technical, threat vectors that, we're kind of keeping an eye out for. So distributed denial of service, that's basically leveraging compromised devices, maybe commodity home routers or Internet of Things devices to essentially send lots of traffic to a target destination in hopes to cause service disruption or prevent customers from logging in or accessing a public-facing page, et cetera. Second item, credential validation attacks. So this is going to be usually an automated process where a malicious actor is going to be running through hundreds, if not thousands, of credentials, usernames, and passwords to see, kind of like a spray and pray, maybe at a login portal, to see what works. Are they, is that password, username password combo still good or not? Which could then lead into an account takeover. So if that CVA was successful, maybe they were able to validate the credentials and then potentially resell that username and password combo within the dark web or criminal forums. That leaves the potential, the door open for an account takeover. Having access to customer funds at that point. Business email compromise, what we're looking at here is, the third parties that, we do business with on a day-to-day basis. We want to make sure that, their employees, haven't, for example, gotten phished and had their email account compromised, and essentially, maybe they're, these malicious actors are then engaging in conversations with us, requesting, funds to be sent here, so we're going to be looking out for that. And lastly, mule accounts, money laundering, facilitating criminal activity that might be, these criminal organizations might be leveraging not only our financial institution, but other financial institutions. So yeah, let's move on. So basically, so we've talked about cyber crimes and want to kind of lead this into cyber fraud fusion. So what is the objective? How do we accomplish this? So the concept is we'll have key stakeholders, partners. They're going to be building, delivering, operationalizing actionable intelligence, and they're going to be doing this by fusing external and internal data, applying analytics to it. And the goal of this is to prevent, detect, and mitigate cyber crimes and, of course, loss of data, whether that be customer or proprietary at that point. So what is required? What are the components? I know Keith touched on a lot of these topics earlier. So, basically we've got expertise, data fusion, analytics, intelligence here. So regarding expertise, direct experience related to customer and employees, cyber and fraud backgrounds, relevant skill sets, that's going to be key there. In terms of data fusion, integration, correlation, enrichment, and another thing that, another great point that Keith brought up was the case management integration. You're going to have, multiple departments, maybe using their own case management system. So how can we tap into that? Additionally, analytics, anomaly detection, link analysis, can we be more proactive? Can we, start to get into predictive threat assessments, and can we apply some risk scoring to the activity that we're seeing? And lastly, here, my favorite component is going to be intelligence. And, the key things to remember, is that it's going to be actionable, timely, relevant. How are we going to essentially operationalize alerts or communications related to these cyber events that are enriched via the threat intelligence lifecycle? And lastly here, weekly reports and ad hoc communications. That's, those are our deliverables. Those are ways we can, opportunities for brand marketing in terms of our fusion efforts and threat intelligence efforts. So what are going to be our areas of focus? We want to focus on use case development. Of course, let's optimize the time that our human analysts are spending. So let's look for those automation opportunities. Let's look for ways that we can develop processes that we're essentially looking at these events through an enterprise lens. So not just isolated within a single silo or just a independent team's perspective at that point. Prevention is priority. So, prevention versus prosecution. Like, our main goal is to prevent cybercrime activity, cyber fraud activity, et cetera. That is going to be key. And, another important aspect is the integration. This is a cross-team program, include various, key stakeholders: cybersecurity, physical security, enterprise fraud, legal, anti-money laundering. Again, advanced analytics. This is what the fusion is all about in terms of the data. How can we identify additional correlations, new insights, by now tapping into data streams, again, that might have been, one team may have never set eyes on a particular set of data until these initiatives. And this last item here, define an integration process and implement and optimize, the escalation process. So, traditionally, whether it's a fraud event or a cybersecurity event, each team would work on these independently. There may be a reason to engage, another team outside their department, maybe to gather some additional information. But with this fusion strategy, we're really trying to have a high-level workflow that will kick off in parallel multiple operational processes, with the end goal of consolidating and, again, painting that, as accurate of a picture as possible related to a cyber event or cyber-enabled crime. So moving on, from the fusion strategy now to, how exactly can we fuse threat intelligence? So this first question here, can we find value in applying threat intelligence to these areas? So the answer is possibly, okay? But unfortunately, that's not a great answer, to give your boss and other senior leaders. So you know, I'd like to reframe the question. So can we increase our confidence of known bad and suspicious activity by leveraging technical threat intel? And the answer is absolutely yes. So, you know, one of the value adds is, you know, kind of highlighting activity earlier in the cybercrimes life cycle to create some red flags or to identify, you know, suspicious, malicious activity. So on the bottom here, I've got, you know, just a very simplified version of, you know, cybercrimes life cycle. You know, this leftmost portion here, credential acquisition. So that might be associated with banking Trojans, password stealers, phishing campaigns. But if we're able to, you know, potentially partner with our threat intelligence vendors or law enforcement or membership organizations, maybe we can get additional insight and visibility into these, you know, criminal forums or dark web websites that might, you know, be providing these data dumps or, you know, have some additional context related to how these credentials are being acquired, essentially. The second item, the validation of the credentials. So again, this is generally going to be an automated, you know, service or script, you know, that someone may run against, you know, generally a login page. And what they're looking for is, you know, basically some feedback that, you know, that username and password is good. So, you know, how we can, you know, one opportunity we have, you know, the validation credentials portion of this is, can we truly identify an automated bot versus a human, you know, checking these credentials, logging into sites, et cetera. Sales purchase, again, this is, you know, this goes with dark web monitoring, criminal forums, et cetera. Can we get some, you know, additional insight into, you know, an uptick in activity? Has there been, you know, the latest data breach, you know, hundreds of thousands of credentials exposed? Likely we would have either some customer or an employee impact at that time. So this last stage, you know, they've acquired the credentials, they validated, you know, they purchased known good credentials. And this last portion here is, you know, malicious actor essentially leveraging all that, logging into a customer account and, you know, potentially withdrawing funds, et cetera. So, and one thing I did want to mention, it was interesting, speaking about red flags, I read an article this week. The Australian Taxation Organization is basically monitoring for data breaches and, you know, folks that would leverage their service. If they are found to be exposed within a data breach, the taxation organization will essentially set up a red flag for investigators internally to then kind of keep an eye on account activity. So I just thought that was interesting. So real quick, high-level case study. So what's the problem with using threat intelligence? You know, traditionally, usage of this data, you know, has been isolated to specific teams or business lines. It really hasn't been analyzed to offer value in other areas besides, you know, maybe the primary owners of that data set. And there's truly an abundance of data out there to process and exploit. So we've got an opportunity here, you know, intelligence sharing across core teams and partners. That kind of solves, you know, the fact that data may have been, you know, kind of dedicated to a particular team. You know, how can we, you know, if we're able to analyze these data sets and find that value in other areas, tap into new data sets, you know, go through that threat intelligence life cycle. Doing this allows us to continuously adapt and, you know, identify new techniques, tactics, procedures, being leveraged by the bad guys. And it also expands, our scope of what we've got visibility on. And lastly, in order to deal with those large volumes of data, in order to process, you really need a centralized platform that will aggregate the internal and external data. Again, that's really that fusion concept, related to data specifically. And you can kind of view it as an intelligence pipeline almost. You're going to have all these disparate sources essentially being consolidated to a centralized platform. So let's talk about, our scope here. First being external sources. I've got a few here, membership organizations. For example, near and dear to my heart, the FSISAC, which is the Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center, basically comprised of financial institutions across the globe. Another one, NCFTA, so that's the National Cyber Forensics and Training Alliance. They've got some great data feeds and intelligence offerings. And in addition to just a technical straight feed, there's more than enough opportunity to collaborate with peers, within your own sector or with other professionals, even outside of your sector through these membership organizations. Additionally, third-party intelligence providers. And once we get these deliverables either from, FSISAC or a third-party intelligence provider, what do we do with it? So again, let's apply that threat intelligence, life cycle, that workflow. Let's turn that data into actionable intelligence, and let's operationalize, the alerts that are being created from these sources. Improving benefits of TI across the enterprise. So, one of the things that we've been trying to focus on is, again, expanding the value of data feeds. So, can a threat intelligence feed provide value in the cyber fraud department? And again, the answer isn't a quick yes, but there's ways we can slice and dice. What is traditionally maybe a TI feed, threat intelligence feed, and add some context. Maybe look at a different time frame, looking at different technical indicators, enriching that where we can then make it fraud applicable at that point. Diner menu here, this is just one way you can kind of itemize and kind of, characterize each of these intelligence feeds. But what this allows you to do is go to other departments and teams and say, here's the diner menu. This is what we have available. You pick and choose what you want. We'll get the data to you. Processing threat intelligence. So again, the importance of the TI lifecycle, collecting, analyze, making those correlations across these once disparate data sets. And, again, distributing that intelligence to key stakeholders, whether that's other internal security teams, enterprise fraud, senior leadership, executive leadership, that final product needs to be tailored for the audience at that point. Last thing here, be a leader and not just a consumer. So this is very important in threat intelligence. The fact that, there needs to be two-way sharing. It's that the neighborhood approach. It's that, hey, if I see something, I'm going to give you a heads up to, hopefully allow you to, have an opportunity to better defend against, maybe a cyber event that we're encountering. So that is very important. So what are some value adds? When we talk about fusing threat intelligence? Well, The first, and I've kind of touched on it before, is you're getting the most usage, the most utility out of these external threat intelligence feeds. Again, rather than having minimal value, being supplied within a single team. Another value add is you're going to have known bad and high confidence indicators and intelligence that one department comes across that could be utilized across the organization as a whole. So you need to truly be able to apply these maybe these once hyper-focused threats and truly see how that affects your entire attack surface at that point. And this last item here, you're going to get internal, external data sources, fused together in order to find those correlations. And this will put you in a better position to succeed in order to detect, aid in incident response, aid in investigations, and also collaborate, throughout these cyber events. Let's see here. Next slide. So real quickly, just want to talk about some wins that we've had. By applying this technical threat intelligence, especially in the fraud area, we've been able to identify a lot of, known bad infrastructure that might be hitting our environment. We've got enhanced monitoring for employee and customer credentials within the dark web. So we're actively, monitoring, for data dumps or, advertisements, for these credentials being sold. We've implemented distribution of business email compromise intelligence to our anti-money laundering partners on a daily basis. And another win is we've been actually able to increase our correlation scope within our SIM to include additional indices of data. So again, that concept of, hey, I usually don't tap into your data set, but there's an opportunity here, so let's increase our scope, to find that value. And then lastly, real quick, this process allowed us to truly do an intelligence source review to allow those other business units to identify those value add opportunities that could be leveraged by tapping into these other data sets. So, where do we want to go? Obviously, automation, security orchestration, automation and response are SOAR efforts. We'd truly like to continue to implement, develop high confidence and repeatable workflows. That's very important. Can we, remove some of the some parts of the process where automation may be more efficient and allow our human analysts to focus their time maybe on the analysis part. So let's automate enrichment of some of these technical IOCs. Let's add some context. Last thing here, data normalization, processing, parsing out technical indicators, and then staging that data potentially for an ingestion within a centralized platform or staging it for another team to use. And second item here, single pane of glass. So, this is certainly a future state, but with this fusion concept, how can we essentially have multiple teams be, looking at the same data set, let me rephrase that, same alerts, that other core teams would have, but how can we make their time of most value again? So that's reducing the noise to signal. Let's reduce the false positives that may be generated. And again, this will allow us to, hopefully identify some activity that cyber teams may not traditionally have eyes on, maybe in the fraud space, but then we can do that link analysis, to kind of put those puzzle pieces together. So, how can we get there? Basically, continued use case development. We're going to allow teams access to more outputs of, from these data correlations. Let's slice and dice this data. Let's ask it different questions. Let's create different queries within our SIM to produce, different results. Let's develop new dashboards. Let's continue to integrate, with our existing, augment an existing process or create new ones. And then, with this use case development, we can continue to apply new context to existing activity that we may not have had insight on, prior to this. Feedback is going to be critical. Metrics, how much of this confirmed activity was actually fraud, getting that feedback loop, how can we take this feedback, prioritize, adjust accordingly. And lastly here, implement and improve upon. How can we reduce that delta to identify fraudulent and suspicious activity? How can we identify that much sooner? How can we do better there? And then this last point here, considering we're living in unprecedented times right now with the pandemic, can we truly develop location agnostic, proximity agnostic workflows and processes, to keep pushing this vision forward until we can get back into the office, until we can truly capitalize on that, the fusion center concept, the physical, component of that. So last thing here, lessons learned. This is, as Keith and Hayes mentioned, this is truly a cross department, cross organization effort here. Not to sound, too silly, but teamwork truly makes the dream work. I don't think we would have made the progress that we have in such a short amount of time without those partnerships and collaboration. So I just want to take a quick minute. I want to give a shout out to my counterpart on the enterprise fraud side, Joseph Morgan, who's been, again, a great partner, and he's made this implementation that much easier. So, working with good people has its benefits. So some other items, build that foundation on trust, respect, transparency. Leave your egos at the door. We're all in this together. Let's look for those opportunities to improve accuracy and precision. It's one thing to be accurate. It's another thing to be continually accurate. And last item here, you got to build your network, beyond your own four walls, your own organization. So whether that's membership in private organizations like FSISAC, NCFTA, law enforcement, local FBI field office, peers within the sector, and security conferences. Great opportunity, again, to build that network out. So that is all I had. I truly appreciate the opportunity, and hopefully you either learned something new or it was a refresher. Very grateful, again, for the chance to speak to you all. So thank you.
Well, Daniel and team, thank you so much. That was a great overview, but also at the same time, super pragmatic advice and some stuff that I was sitting there going, this difference between complex and complexity. And that's actually where I'd ask my first question is, how did you balance this getting so complex that it was hard to understand what it's doing and what it might be missing? How did you balance that complexity? I know early on you talked about keeping it simple, but how did you balance complexity there? And Daniel, I have to lead it for you.
Oh, sorry about that. So, I think it's honestly, it's transparency. It's building those partnerships. It's collaborating. It's knowing, kind of what you're getting into.
It's just judgment, huh? Professional judgment.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, we're at the start of our journey, so I think, I think, you need to leverage, again, not only your internal resources, but, Hayes kind of mentioned those third parties, where can you get some, maybe some guidance, some consulting advice, to assist and help you prioritize and, help you focus in particular areas, to put you in the best position to succeed.
No substitute for experience sometimes. One other question came through about, you'd mentioned about finished intelligence products. And those finished intelligence products have the technology, the tactical operations, but also the strategic. And the question was, how do you know when you're done? You don't want to just send over a raw technical data, but at the same time, if you waited until you had all the information that's polished and perfect, maybe it's too late to take an action.
No, and honestly, that's a great question. So, I think there's a time and a place where it may take weeks or months to do, maybe a little more in-depth analysis where your end goal might be to, essentially create a white paper almost that, might be a little more in depth. But, I think what my team focuses on is awareness, and it needs to be timely. It needs to be actionable. So unfortunately, we don't have the luxury of always waiting until an event wraps up. And, at that point, we do have maybe not all the answers, but more answers. So what we're trying to do is provide awareness as an event evolves. And, we do that by our official cyber threat intelligence communications that we'll send out. We'll have the main event pop, and then we'll actually send out corresponding updates throughout the life cycle of that event, if it's warranted and if there are relevant updates.
Wow. Well, we are at the top of the hour. Daniel, and I know that Hayes and Keith both had to drop for other meetings, but thank you and your guys so much for this pragmatic advice and this insight into something that is a bit complex, but I feel like we got a master's lesson in cybersecurity from your perspective here today. So thank you so much.